and your email in the chat. If you're in a room, if you could grab everybody's name, email, and district, that'd be fantastic as well. So my name is Dave Williams. I work here at Intermountain ESD. I've been here for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was a longtime administrator in the Pendleton School District. And it's interesting, I've given this ACES 101 chat for almost 10 years now. It's in a PowerPoint presentation, so I do have better tech skills than I did 10 years ago, but I've just largely kept this intact and have made very, very minimal changes to it over the years. What really piqued my interest years ago, I became an administrator in 2004, and around 2013, 14 or so, I really started to see a little different dynamic with the students that we were seeing in our buildings. I was a high school assistant principal, then later middle school assistant principal, and then principal. And I remember just kind of hearing stories from our kids, stories from their parents, and hearing about trauma-informed care and adverse childhood experiences. And so with that, I did a little bit of a deep dive, connected actually with a former teaching partner of mine who worked as a curriculum director, who had been connected with a big ACES funding project in the state of Oregon, and largely stole a lot of the presentation from him. So for a while, Matt Yoshioka and I from Pendleton would present this together. We put the presentation together, and since around 2018, 19, I've been doing this largely solo. And a lot of the information has not changed, but it changed my view as an administrator, just kind of learning and going through some pieces. So as a former social studies teacher, there's always a great opportunity to embed a video. So I found this video actually a year ago, and it really does a fantastic job of giving an overview without stealing my entire presentation. So let me pull this up. It's just a few minutes, and we will reconvene. Here we go. Can everybody see this okay? We're good? Oops, hold on a second. I do need to do one thing. I forgot to do this. Let me share. There we go. Okay, now we're good.
The term ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are stressful or traumatic experiences that happen in childhood that can increase the risk for significant health, mental health, and behavioral consequences later in life. They really come from a big landmark research study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser now more than 20 years ago, in which they asked adults about their history of 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, and these include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or growing up in a household where a parent experienced mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, where there was parental separation or divorce, or intimate partner violence. What they found was, number one, ACEs are super common. And number two, that there's this really significant effect. So there's a direct, what we call a dose-response relationship between adverse childhood experiences and some of the most significant and serious health conditions that are facing Americans today. 2/3 of individuals had experienced at least one, and 1 in 8 folks had experienced 4 or more. When we talk about how many of us have experienced ACEs, what we see is that ACEs impact every community, every demographic group, but it impacts our vulnerable communities in a disproportionate level. The big surprise about the ACE study was that for someone with 4 more ACEs, their risk of heart disease was double. right? For stroke and cancer and liver disease and diabetes, even autoimmune disease. And a lot of these things are things that we didn't kind of traditionally or intuitively associate with childhood trauma. But now we can use this science to understand actually what happens in our brains and bodies when we're exposed to trauma or adversity, and especially in childhood. The term, the toxic stress response, actually refers to the prolonged activation of our body's stress response, the release of all those stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol and all of those things that go along with our stress response. And then also the ways in which that affects our bodies. Children are especially vulnerable to this repeated activation of the stress response because their brains and bodies are just developing. So high doses of adversity in children actually changes the way their brains develop. It changes the way their hormonal systems develop, their immune system develops, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed. And those long-term changes are what we refer to as the toxic stress response. One of the things that's really challenging about ACEs is that they tend to repeat in families, generation after generation. And I will say this as someone who has experienced my fair share of ACEs. Understanding how that might be impacting me and being able to recognize that, for me, is really the key for being able to do things differently. When we understand what happens in our bodies with the toxic stress response, and we understand that it's that prolonged activation of our stress response, then step one is really understanding what are the things that help to regulate our stress response. And immediately at that point, we begin decreasing the harm that happened as a result of our past experiences. So things like mindfulness, right? Meditation, spending time in nature, mental health interventions, regular exercise, nutritional strategies, and my favorite, healthy relationships. All of these things are really scientifically demonstrated to help to regulate the biological stress response, and they improve our outcomes for those of us who have experienced ACEs. These nurturing relationships, they feel good, which is good, of course, but they literally change our biology. When we have safe, stable, and nurturing relationships in our lives, it improves our neurologic functioning, it improves our hormonal regulation, it improves our immune functioning, and these social supports are critical part of healing. If we all understand our role in being a source of buffering care to a young person in need, that is truly transformative. ACEs Aware is a first-in-the-nation effort to train our healthcare providers how to screen for adverse childhood experiences and how to respond in an evidence-based, trauma-informed way that helps to improve outcomes for children and adults. ACEs are not destiny. Even if someone has experienced significant ACEs, it doesn't mean that they are absolutely going to have these negative outcomes. Recognizing our ACEs requires us to recognize our vulnerability. And that can be really scary. But it also is the place where we get a chance to ask for what we need. I deeply believe that we can cut ACEs and toxic stress by half in one generation.
All right. Thank you. Let me see here. How am I doing? Give me a second. There we are. Okay. It's interesting that I've given this training a number of times, and for a while, like the first couple times I did it, I would actually hand out an ACEs screener. Not really a good idea, and I recognize this. I remember giving it to the custodial slash maintenance staff one time, and it's just kind of a quick overview to identify, like, hey, who has been subjected to like some significant trauma as a child. And people were quickly going through it and say, "Hey, I got a 6. Hey, no, I got a 7." It's like, okay, that was not a good idea. But the one thing to echo of what we just heard in the video is ACEs are not a destination. So it is kind of a hard topic. I'm going to go through some really, really, really depressing statistics here in just a minute. But the one thing that I want to resonate before we jump in is that ACEs are not a destination. I know a really good friend of mine. She's a fantastic teacher, an amazing mom, has a wonderful family. She has an ACE score of 9. And I never really knew that about her until she shared that with me as a colleague, just kind of going through some information. But she's fantastic. And there's a lot of mitigating circumstances that she worked through in her life to make it a non-issue. So let's jump in here first. Kind of the study that kick-started everything that we know about ACEs today took place from Kaiser Permanente, one of the largest insurers in the nation. It literally started as a water cooler conversation between two physicians. So these two doctors working together were chatting and just kind of comparing notes, and they came to the realization, like, the patients that we're seeing as adults that have significant health issues have all admitted that they were subjected to early childhood trauma. So they developed a hypothesis and decided, let's jump into this just a little bit further. And they created a study involving a little over 17,000 people. They invited 26,000 to participate. The very first study was very, very middle class, just middle socioeconomic status, largely Caucasian, and the results that they found kind of blew them away. What's also interesting, every time that this study has been replicated, the results are always the same. And so really what it comes down to, they identified 10 common ACEs that are listed there: physical and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, a mother treated violently, household substance abuse, down to the bottom where we have an incarcerated household member. Since this came out, there have been other ACEs that have been identified, such as moving, such as being a victim of bullying and whatnot. But for right now, those are the first ones that were identified. What they found in that very first study is that about a third of the adults have an ACE score of 0. And because they have an ACE score of 0, that they have really no significant risk factors pertaining to disease that are common causes of death as an adult. From there, things kind of get a little depressing. So as you work down, about 26% of the population has an ACE of 1, all the way down to where 16% of folks in the US have an ACE score of 4 or more. From that, they found that women are 50% more likely than men to have an ACE score greater than 5. And the next piece, which makes perfect sense, if there's any one ACE present, there's an 87% likelihood that there's going to be something else present, or that there's possibly two others, which makes sense when you think about something like substance abuse. There could be items such as being incarcerated, such as turning that into physical abuse or neglect or whatnot. They also found that the combination makes ACEs the leading detriment or determinant of health and social well-being in our nation. As a matter of fact, there's also work to trying to figure out healthcare planning needs for communities, not based on socioeconomic status, but based more on, hey, the prevalence of ACEs and early childhood trauma, that it was more connected to long-term adult health. Also, commonly linked to, so here I won't read everything on this slide, but they're all
Hey
rather
Dave,
depressing.
hey
Yes, please
Dave,
stop.
sorry to interrupt. We can't see the slide deck and I know you're kind of
No!
cruising through it.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna try this again. Dang it, you should. Now I feel like an idiot. Holy cow. Let me try this again. Here we go. Okay. Can we see it now? Are you good? Can you see it
You're
now?
good. You're good.
Okay. Holy cow, Dave. Jiminy Christmas. How cool am I? Here we go. These wonderful pictures. Let's go back really quick. There's the study. Here are the 10 most common ACEs. There you go. And we are now up to date. So thank you, Angie. So again, very depressing, just how ACEs are commonly linked, up to and including early mortality. Um, People with four or more ACEs as compared to the baseline of somebody with none, just what the percentage of risk factor would include each one of those items, and a probability of outcomes as well. With no ACEs, 1 in 16 smokes, all the way over to the far right, 1 in 6 smokes. So kind of bringing this all home after going through our depressing statistics, you're probably wondering why in the world does he have a slide with a mountain lion and some poor kid riding his bike with a dog? So I'll start the picture on the left. There's two stories. When Matt Yoshioka and I gave this presentation, um, he shared a story with me one time, happened to him a little over 10 years ago. If you know Matt, and most of you from Pendleton know Matt, he's very slender. He's in great shape. One of his hobbies is going out walking around in the forest and trying to find antler sheds in the springtime. So he shared with me that he was up looking for sheds one time. It was in the early spring. He was by himself. He was actually above like the Kiwanis cabins of where the outdoor school facility is for the Pendleton School District. And he's out all by himself, quite a ways away from his pickup. And he was had his binoculars up, and he was looking, kind of glassing out a far ridge line, and he just didn't feel right. Something just was making the hair stand up on the back of his neck. So he pulls his binoculars down, looks around, and about 30 feet away from him, he sees this mountain lion crouched. And if you're familiar with mountain lions, this is kind of a side note. I didn't know this, but they're wired exactly like your house cat. So, and oftentimes house cats, if you had them, they like to just go pounce on little critters. They may not even be hungry. They just like to like play with them. And my cat that I had a while back ago, it would like wound a mouse just to play with it and flop it up. It was awful. But anyway, Matt sees this cat, and this cat is crouched, and Matt doesn't think twice, and he jumps out at the mountain lion and just says, "Bring it on!" Just yells really loud, got really big. And the mountain lion's like, "Whoa, what the heck?" And jumped up in the air, spun around, and took off down the mountain. So, and Matt worked his way back up to his pickup, started shaking, got in his truck, and came home. So on my particular case, what happened, this is the best I could do for my story. I'm sure if I AI'd something, I would be able to pull up something way better than the poor kid on the bike. But I enjoy riding my bike. I like to walk, ride my bike, get some fresh air in the afternoon. So there was one particular day I was riding my bike in Pendleton, and I turn by the Bob White baseball field to go up Northgate, up Holman route. And if you're not familiar with Pendleton very much, everything is on an incline or a decline in town. There are no flat roads in town. So I'm riding up the hill to go to my house. And I'm cruising along pretty well. And there's a motorhome that's kind of parked off the side of the road about 50 feet or so. And underneath the motorhome, I see a pit bull. And I immediately look, and there's no chain, no rope, no nothing around this dog's neck. And I'm a dog person, love dogs, have a great connection with dogs. I can always tell, hey, if I have a moment, we make eye contact. Hey, we're buddies, we're pals. When I made eye contact with this pit bull, we were definitely not buddies. We were definitely not pals. And that thing was after me just in a nanosecond. At the same time, I took off as well on my mountain bike. Thank goodness my gears on my Shimano all hit just right, and I was able to outrun this pit bull. Now, maybe I didn't really outrun it. Maybe this pit bull let me get away. I'm not sure. I like to believe that the thing that I outran it, but the thing sounded like a freight train right behind me, and as it was growling and trying to bite my leg. And I finally just worked. I was going uphill, flying on my mountain bike, and finally the pit bull gave up and turned around and went back. Got up to the house, and again, totally shaking, pacing around, and trying to get myself together. So both Matt and I, the reason I include both of these stories, went through a process that is very, very common. If you're able to, somebody could either dump it in the chat or just blurt it out loud. What is this process called when we're in that kind of a situation? 3 words. Anybody? Did I hear somebody say fight, flight, or freeze? Wonderful. That's exactly it. Fight, flight, or freeze. Matt went with the I'm going to try to fight the kitty cat avenue. Maybe it was a massive bluff, but be that as it may, the cat turned around and took off. I went for more of the flight mechanism and bailed out of there as fast as I can. I really feel like if I would have froze or Matt would have froze, it may not have been very good for either one of us, probably more so for Matt than it would have been for me. But as you're going through fight, flight, or freeze, there is a process that takes place that goes through within our body, and there's a time sequence to this. If you've had any kind of training around conscious discipline or whatnot, and you're familiar with flipping your lid, this is the point in time where, hey, we were flipped. There were 2 hormones that were buzzing in our bodies. One is cortisol. It's the stress hormone. It allows us to absolutely focus in moments of stress. In no time when I was riding my bike out of the way was I thinking about going to the store to buy dinner, which was on my list of things to do, or thinking about what I needed to get my wife for her birthday. I was totally focused on hitting the gears just right and getting out of there. The other hormone that's buzzing through our body is your superhuman adrenaline. Adrenaline is that superhuman hormone that allows you to do things significantly stronger than you regularly could. And in my case, it was riding my bike super, super fast. So those are the 2 pieces that are going through our body. But there's a starting point and a stopping point to this. And without opening it up for the question, this typically takes around 20 minutes. So if there was a triggering point, the spot where I see the pit bull and I take off and I buzz after and I get away all the way up through the crisis, and then all of a sudden I'm safe, you typically take a hard crash after this, and there's a 20-minute span in between trigger and stabilization. That could be different for anybody. It could be longer, it could be shorter. But thinking of it in the context of schools and kids, it's never really a good practice to work with a student if they are triggered and in crisis mode. Aside from working with ACEs or even talking about this, thinking about as an administrator, if you've ever broken up a fight, you don't want to go debrief the fight right after the fight. You let kids sit, let them chill, let them get themselves together to where they can think clearly, and then you're able to debrief and problem solve from there. So that's fight, flight, or freeze. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you know if there's any research that shows whether this de-escalation process or the stress cycle is different for kids versus adults time-wise? I mean, I know every person is different, and one person might need an hour and one might be fine after 10 minutes, but do you know if any of the research indicates that kids need more time or what that looks like?
That's an interesting question. Nobody's asked that before. I don't. That'd be really interesting to look at. I know that there's different post-crisis drains and crashes. I've been able to see like after a student who triggers really easily, and I'm working with them in the office or actually just letting them sit and chill in the office for a little bit. Sometimes I'll look out and I think of a few examples where students have actually been asleep in a chair because that crash is so hard,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know about the time span. I just know that when I was presented this information, that the average is 20 minutes and it could vary to individuals.
Thank you.
You betcha. So the next piece, and this is, I'm kind of swirling around first. So we talked about fight, flight, or freeze. We talked about, hey, what that time span looks like. Now let's talk about dendrites. You're all in education. This is why we do what we do. Our business is building dendrites, building memories, building synaptic density. It's interesting. There was a workshop that I went to one time, and it was basically entitled Worksheets Don't Build Dendrites. It's like, dang it. I used way too many when I was in a classroom. So that's why we're here. That's what we do as educators. That's our goal as to, and within our existence. So also thinking about that, the regular brain development for our children usually follows this illustration. At birth, there's very little synaptic density. By the time a child is around 6 or 7 years old, it's the most dense a child's brain or anybody's brain is going to be throughout their lifetime. Then, and we think about that, let's kind of camp here for just a second. When is the best time for somebody to learn a second language? It's as a primary student. When is the best time to probably learn how to play a musical instrument? It's as a young child. It's why is reading so critical at the primary grades? It's because of this. So this is when our brains are the most dense. Then for our beloved middle school teachers who are in the crowd today, by the time you are 14 years old-ish, your brain has gone through significant pruning to where the only synaptic density that's really remaining are the ones that are integral, the pieces that are keeping you going, the ones that are you using every day. So anything that's really not being used is being pruned. And I think about if you spent any time at a middle school level or even thinking about your own children, I'm going to throw my own kid under the bus, Andrew. For by the time he was 10 years old, he started mowing our lawn, that was awesome, among other things. But I remember one day when he was in the 7th grade, I asked him, "Hey, Andrew, can you mow the lawn today?" Okay, fantastic. I come home from work and the backyard is mowed, but not the front. It's like, what? I said, Andrew, you didn't mow the front yard. Oh, I mowed the lawn, Dad. The lawn's in the backyard. It's like, oh my God. Anyway, that's just one example of things happen by the time you're in middle school to where the super valuable synaptic density is really remaining, the dendrites that you've been using. So next piece, trying to pull all of this together. If a child is living with a mountain lion or a pit bull, if somebody is living in constant toxic stress, the only pieces that are going to be super strong in that child's brain are going to be the ones based on survival. Also tied into this as well, not only brain state, but the long-term impact of cortisol, the stress hormone, and adrenaline on your body is truly the cause for those long-term health issues that people have as adults based on their early childhood trauma. So focusing really on where we're at with students and classrooms, this next piece is brain scans from Romanian orphans. If you kept track, there were a number of documentaries that took place in the early 2000s, late 1990s, a significant orphan crisis in Eastern Europe, particularly Romania. So brain scan on the left-hand side is of a child that has a pro-social household, mom and dad, safe environment, has been nurtured appropriately. And then the brain scan on the right is basically an orphan child who has been abandoned into an orphanage. And really what they're trying to point out through the brain scan is that relationships and appropriate connectivity with other human beings is wired into our brains. So what kind of an impact do ACEs really have in our schools? This slide was taken from data from the state of Washington. It's actually from 2017. I would be willing to bet that it might be a little different at this point, but it just points out that as a classroom full of 30 students at the high school level, you would typically have 6 students with no ACE, all the way down to 3 students with 6 ACEs or more spread out. I've always tried to crack a joke at this slide, basically saying, why would anybody put all of the high ACE trauma kids in the very back of the room? But that's always kind of fallen flat as well. So my apologies. Here's the dynamic though for schools. There aren't any ACEs screeners for parents to fill out as they're registering their child for school. There may be ways to find out information if a student has been subjected to early childhood trauma, but that really isn't a form that a parent is likely going to fill out or you're likely going to find out. And we also know that ACEs aren't particular to where it connecting to socioeconomic status. The other piece, which is really interesting, so kind of sharing this story, there was a third grade teacher in the district where I worked. And one day, as class was underway, a little girl came up to her and said, "Hey, teacher, I'd like to say something to the class. I want to share something with the class." And the teacher very wisely asked, "Why don't you share whatever you want to share with me first, and we'll decide together whether we're going to let you tell the whole class." So she did. And she said, "Well, I'm just really excited today because my dad is getting out of prison. I get to see my dad today." So the teacher, kind of thinking through it, said, "Let's do that. Let's go ahead and make that announcement." So she stopped the students' activities and shared that information. Hey, I'm really excited today. I get to see my dad because he gets home from prison today. And she was kind of took a deep breath and was just kind of waiting to see what the reaction was going to be. And hand after hand after hand popped up where students would raise their hands like, "I'm so happy for you. I remember when my dad got out of prison. That was so cool." And then another hand, "Oh, I'm so excited for you. I'm still waiting for my mom to get out of jail." And there were 9 hands that came up out of 25 where students either had a parent that was incarcerated, uh, uh, was previously incarcerated, or there was a family member that was incarcerated. The teacher had no idea. It was kind of mind blowing for her. What's also mind blowing is I shared that story a couple years ago with a Rotary Club here in Pendleton, giving this ACEs presentation, and the jaws dropped on a couple of the people that were listening in the audience. And I remember one guy saying, "You mean here?" Because the teacher was from Pendleton. The guy saying, "You mean here in Pendleton?" It's like, "Yeah, right now." So sharing that, basically saying that a lot of times the people within our community, they don't necessarily understand the dynamic of the students that we're serving right now. So really kind of unique. The only other story kind of even sharing about, there were 2 brothers that I worked with that were in my school when I was a principal. Didn't really know much about them. Older brother was really a good student, had a couple of buddies, had no particular issues, flew under the radar. Didn't know anything really about the dynamic that he had experienced until his little brother landed in school. And his little brother could barely make it through the first week of school, easily blowing out left and right, wanting to fight everybody, wanting to fight me, having to call the police to have him removed from campus. And after talking to mom, I found out she had divulged that, yeah, she had been struggling. The boys had been um, subjected to abuse. She had some boyfriends that were really not really good news. Nobody had really shared with us that the boys had been removed from the home when they were younger. They were in foster care, then landed back with mom. But I say that just we don't know some of the dynamics around our kids. If older brother had gone ahead and navigated school just fine, nobody would have known of what he was subjected to. It wasn't to how the ACEs manifested in the little brother that we really knew the whole story. So the next piece in thinking about how ACEs might affect education, ACE score of 0, very little behavioral or learning issues for a student. As you progress 1 to 3 ACEs, you see a little bit more of an opportunity for the ACEs to get in the way. And then an ACE score of 4 or more, showing that, yeah, there's about a 51% of students that are going to have some learning or behavioral problems due to that. And you kind of think about our students that have been identified with learning disabilities, how many of them are also impacted or are impacted by ACEs, which also manifest as a learning disability as well. Quite a few. So these are, this slide has a huge list of common signs, but just because a student is exhibiting one of these signs, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily a result of early childhood trauma. Again, if you've worked in school long enough, this could be any kid, especially as an 8th grade boy. But be that as it may, when you look at this and you have an understanding of your students that are coming from trauma, you see names and memories and faces of kids that you've worked with over the years. I think a few that come to mind, there's mistreatment of others. I think some of the some kids that oftentimes thought that they were victims of whatnot of others, they were also the biggest mistreaters of others or bullies. I think about one particular student where we're creating their own drama. There was a cheerleader years ago who, great kid, great student, family moved around quite a bit. It was really just her and her mom. Dad was not in the picture. There was a younger sibling as well. But mom passed away suddenly, big time. And the student, she was 17 years old, and the little brother was placed in foster care. She was not. She became emancipated. And also in the process, the cheerleading advisor took her into her home as a spot to stay until she graduated from high school. And it was really, really, really uncomfortable for that student because the cheerleading advisor's house was calm. There was no drama. It was predictable. It was peaceful. And she struggled with that. And she would create her own drama because that was the only thing that really felt normal for her. The other one I think about a student that I dealt with that was comfortable in complete chaos. There was a student, he kept me busy as a middle school kid. But I remember one particular time we had a lockdown drill. It was planned, but I didn't let any of the students or any of the teachers know about it. We needed to get better. And so we go into lockdown and there's chaos in the hallways. And I see this student, he's out and he's making sure to help kids get into the classroom. And he was completely calm, where everybody was panicked. And it's like, hey, we're going into lockdown. And my recorded voice was in the hallways echoing out. And there he was, just, hey, we got this. We're fine. Hey, we're okay. Get in here. Was completely comfortable. He also was the same one there would probably be a fight that he orchestrated, but in the midst of it, he'd be the one trying to break it up, trying to keep everybody calm. Hey, we're good. We've got this. So lots of stories I could go through just thinking about each one of these signs as they pertain to students that I know that came from significant traumatic backgrounds. This is really an interesting aspect, and that is epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of passing on behavior to offspring. So this particular study, the rat and the cherry blossom study, I laugh thinking about how Matt Yoshioka used to present this because he got kind of excited about it, but I'm not nearly as animated as Matt. So basically, who knows how scientists figured this thing out. But anyway, scientists have a few rats. They put them into a cage with a metal floor, and they decide, they have obviously a hypothesis around this, They pump in the very beautiful smell of cherry blossoms. Cherry blossoms smell great. So they pump in the smell of cherry blossoms, then immediately electrify the floor to give the rats just a nice little boost of electricity, to cause just a little bit of pain. And so for those of you who like rats, I'm sure they weren't hurt that bad, but it was enough for them to recognize, hey, I'm being shocked. This is painful. And so they would try to avoid the shocking floor. Then they would turn off the cherry blossom smell and turn off the floor, and all would go back to normal. So the scientists did this a number of times. Then they let these rats procreate and develop new rats. So then they would take all the offspring of these rats, put them into the cage with the electric floor, pump in the smell of cherry blossoms, and without doing anything, the rats would act like they were in pain. So without electrifying it, without turning anything on other than the benign smell of cherry blossoms, those rats gave a reaction as if they were in discomfort. The crazy thing about this study is that it took 3 generations of offspring before the rats did not react to the smell of cherry blossoms coming in. So obviously, human beings are not rats, but the hypothesis around this is trauma can be passed down, or significant events can be passed down to our offspring. So it's a very interesting subject, something I don't have a lot of time to get into, but just thinking about the students we've dealt with historical trauma, and how that might impact within our buildings. There is really good news around this, and that is your brain can be rewired. Thinking about as an adult, I've always told myself I'd love to be able to learn to play guitar, or I'd love to learn a second language. Haven't quite got there yet. I'm not giving up hope, but we all know that we could work and get to a spot where we could acquire new skills. We can create new memories within our brain. So the London taxi cab study is really, really interesting. So a little bit of history. The city of London is not like an American city. It's an ancient city. It was for the history buffs that are in the call right now. It had been an encampment for years and years, but by about AD 50, it became a Roman city and grew and grew and grew, and until I think about AD 400, to where it had about 60,000 residents. Then the Romans moved out and others moved in. The road system in London is not on a grid. The best way to describe how London is laid out is to take a couple balls of yarn, unfold them, and let your cats play with them for a while. That's the road system within London. So a very lucrative profession within London is to be a taxi cab driver. And in order to pass the test to be a taxi cab driver, it takes 3 to 4 years of study. And that study entails basically getting on a moped or a bicycle and driving around streets within the city to memorize locations and routes. Apparently, using a GPS is doable in London. However, there's so many streets that are under different stages of construction or blockages on certain days that a GPS will never be able to pick that up. So it's the knowledge of the taxi cab driver that allows them to be successful in getting their people from point A to point B. So when they take this test, there was a study that was done. The people who passed the test and the people who did not pass the test had a brain scan, and the scans were consistent, showing the size of the brain, the synaptic, what they could measure with synaptic density, and the size of the hippocampus, which is the memory center in the brain. So then fast forward 4 years, they did the same brain scans on the same people, the people who were in the profession, those who were not because they never passed the test. And what they found is after 4 years of being a London taxi cab driver, the synaptic density increased and the size of the hippocampus enlarged in the folks that were within the profession. So that really shares that we know that our brains can be rewired. And I know that we're talking memories here, we're not talking trauma, but the same thing really can apply as we're talking to the long-term mitigating aspects of trauma. In the video that we showed at the very beginning, we talked about just, hey, the value of relationships and how important those are to mitigate the impact. I think about the friend that I shared with earlier. Her largest mitigating factor for her own trauma was landing with her grandparents. She said she landed with them at the end of her middle school years, and they were the stabilizing force that allowed her to be successful in high school. And then it was a high school counselor who recognized, hey, you're really, really smart, and here are all the scholarships that can be available to you. And that allowed her to go pursue a degree and become a teacher and lead the life that she's living right now. What's also interesting in sharing about her, I forgot to share, when she did land with her grandparents, she said for the first 2 months that she lived there, she rearranged her room every day because it just did not feel right. She had moved over 30 times by the time that she landed with her grandparents, and just being stable and trying to with a predictable environment, it just did not feel entirely comfortable for her. So moving on, I'm not going to show either one of those two videos. Just some small steps that we can take. So thinking about in education, everything that I'm about to share, they're not just good for students from a traumatic background, but they're good for all kids. It's kind of like I equate this to reading instruction. We know that students who struggle to read or are beyond, below grade level in reading, that if we embed really good context clues or are really explicit around vocabulary, that those are really, really good tools for students who struggle to read. But they're really, really, really good tools for anybody beyond that. So it's the same thing in thinking about trauma versus non-trauma. These are just really good practices that we could take for our schools, for anybody. What we should be doing is focusing on student strengths, especially students with challenging behaviors. And I know the challenge of that sometimes is a student that is really struggling or has a high ACEs score that we may know or not know about. Sometimes it's hard to focus on those strengths, but it's very important to try to identify them, lean into them with the student, remind them like, hey, you are really good at this, you and this. Focus on and provide explicit instruction on self-regulation. I think about our conscious discipline folks who, after years of practice, just knowing, hey, what that looks like. That looks like greeting kids at the door and making that one-on-one connection. That gives them also leaning into skills within the classroom, like, hey, how are you able to teach skills to allow them to self-manage? The next piece I think is very important, and that is don't lower the bar pertaining to expectations. If you have a student that struggles, have a student coming from a traumatic childhood, lowering the bar has been said to be actually dehumanizing. We don't want to lower the bar. We may know that they're going to struggle to meet those expectations, but trying to put supports in place and reminders to try to meet those is what that student needs. The other piece, just proactively creating a trusting environment, provide whatever level of support the student needs to be clear about their boundaries. And the very last one is kind of one of my favorites, is avoid as best as possible about making a tough situation even worse. This is don't poke the rattlesnake. Always, somebody's got someone needs to mute. There we go. Awesome. Don't poke the rattlesnake. I say that and kind of smile because as an administrator, I poke that rattlesnake at times. When students' lids are flipped, I don't want to make that any worse than it possibly can be. The biggest piece is really building relationships, trying to connect with and build a predictable relationship with a student. Sometimes that's really, really challenging. I remember as a principal, we did an exercise at the beginning of the year where we put everybody's name in the school into our staff rooms, and we've ended up marking, putting our initials next to the students' names of students that we felt like that we had a relationship with, that we knew something about the kid, they knew something about us, and that we knew that we had a connection. And the challenge being throughout the year, can we put more initials next to students who had none? Just trying to be really, really deliberate about making those kind of connections. The next one, in my opinion, is they're all good, obviously. This is a really big one, and that is providing predictability. As administrator, I always loved to mix it up. I loved a good dress up day. I loved any excuse to have an assembly. Hey, let's put seventh period, first period, and let's do this and really stir the pot for the day. I also realized those were the hardest days for some of our kids because they were unpredictable. So, as an educator, just thinking about, hey, how do you develop a predictable pattern? How are you able to communicate what the expectations are going to look like on a day that might be a little bit different and work with them accordingly? And it could be anything, all the way from, hey, there's probably going to be a fire drill coming up here pretty soon. There's going to be a schedule change, working with and framing for a student what they're going to have to go through to navigate that change. Also thinking about what are some occupations or subjects where ACE students with a high ACE score might excel. I will leave as an opportunity for you to unmute and share. If you like, you can blurt something out or drop one in the chat. I could sing a little bit of the Jeopardy theme song. Okay, I'll fill in the blank. Utilizing a little bit of my wait time, but I will go ahead and blurt out a few that have been blurted out before. One is a first responder, somebody who's able to arrive when we need somebody the most, and having them being calm and well adjusted in a situation that can be rather traumatic. We oftentimes talk about teachers and counselors that would be a great occupation for somebody with a high ACE score to have a real understanding of the clientele that they're working with. Also think about, I did not realize this, but a large commercial kitchen is chaotic. I didn't know that. I've watched a little bit of Hell's Kitchen. Maybe that's just a little over dramatized because it's a TV piece, but just knowing that that might be a situation where I'd want somebody able to keep their cool under a pretty intense situation. I think about military personnel and what they may be going through. And then also, a lot of our favorite athletes, when you kind of hear about their background, they have come from, some of them, some significantly overcome significant trauma within their lives. So very interesting to kind of take a deep dive in that. Also thinking about from our conscious discipline side, as an adult or a teacher, just regulating yourself as you're working with kids that are really hard, that might be flipping their lid, to be sure that you are not flipping that you're not flipping yours. I think about one of the superpowers that a lot of students have that are coming from a high ACE score, and that is they're able to read adults really, really, really good. I think about my really good friend that I work with. I walked into her classroom one day just to say hi or whatnot, and she pulled me aside and says, "Dave, you're really sad today. I could see it." It's like, dang it. I try to keep all that to myself, but it is a superpower of our kids. And thinking about as an adult, if they see us get amped up and they can recognize that. So making sure that we're calm, that we're breathing well, making sure we're not flipping our lid is really huge. And it happens with adults. And I always put this in, I enjoy going fishing and I laugh about this. Any excuse to put in a fishing picture in my presentation is fantastic. But as a principal, I remember getting called often, to a classroom or to a situation. You would get either a phone call or a radio call. "Mr. Williams, we need you in room whatever." I'm not being called there to get a reward or somebody to give me a cupcake or a cookie. I'm usually going there because something really bad is happening. And as I'm shuffling my way up to said classroom or location, I would just oftentimes think about, hey, on a bright sunny day, blue and green lure color with chrome is really, really money. And on a cloudy day, dark purple, you really can't beat it sometimes. So taking my mind somewhere else to make sure that when I arrive in a stressful situation, that I have every one of my mental capabilities, my lid is not flipped. And the calmer you are as an adult, the better your kids will be as they try to navigate that situation. So I have one last video to show. I'll pull this up here. Hopefully we'll. Angie and Jennifer, can you hear that okay?
We can't see or hear anything.
Okay. Okay, hold on a second. Here we go. Oops, let me do this one more time. I'll do this one more time. Hold on. Good now?
Hey, Mr. Q.
Good.
Did you see that? Why would somebody do that?
Please go into the classroom, no talking, quietly.
Hey, Miss Merida, how you doing?
We need you inside.
How do you think that makes us feel? I forgot my number.
What's your name?
Jordan?
What's your last name?
Carter?
Go ahead.
School is hard enough.
Come on in, sit down quietly at your desks, and begin writing.
This kind of stuff just makes it harder.
I said quietly, please. Who's talking? Is it you, Sophie? Don't let it be you.
Don't believe me?
Sophie.
Please just watch.
I'm not up here for me, I'm up here for you. Pay attention, okay? Now somebody answer me. Somebody needs to answer me really fast.
Every time we're ignored or yelled at or silenced, a teacher takes away what's possible.
No horseplay, no running, and especially no talking.
Moment by moment.
Miss McGarity, your student's behavior yesterday in the lunchroom, it was terrible. Next time, silent lunch.
Did you hear that? Stay in line and catch a bubble. I'm not playing.
If this is education, we're in trouble.
Bye, Miss McGarity.
Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. The way it is now, 2 of the 3 of us will never be able to really read. It doesn't have to be this way.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Everyone we meet throughout our day can make a difference.
I've been waiting for you to arrive.
All the difference.
Good, how are you? Great. Hi, Jordan. Bye, Jason.
Good morning, Jordan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good.
Go ahead and put your number in.
Talk with
I
us,
don't know my number.
not at us.
That's okay. I'll look it up for you. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right. Have a
Teach us what we need to know. That's how we get smarter.
Well, good morning, Sophie, Janicia, and Jordan.
And when you talk with us and teach us, give us bigger and bigger words.
Now what I'd like you to do, children, is turn around and converse with your neighbor and discuss where the mother might have gone.
Words that we can use to read and understand.
She is prey for eagles, so she hunts at night.
And that will take us places we can never reach without you.
Remember, we're entering the learning zone. Now, how can we show our respect to the children and teachers who are working?
We can walk quietly.
Yes. Okay, kids, so what I'd like you to do is continue writing your narrative, documenting your emotions. If you were the baby owl and your mother abandoned you in the nest.
What can you do? Learn all that you can so that you can challenge us to be our best.
You would have stayed and assisted them in whatever they needed.
Share yourself with us and show us how to share ourselves with others. Give us courage. Give us compassion. Help us find our own voices so we can become who we are meant to be.
Why would you want to silence us?
Okay, so that video was really about literacy, but it had so much money just in connectivity and having the right mindset and working with students. So with that, that's all I have. I'll open it up at this time if you have any questions for me. All right, fantastic. It's 3:01 right now, so we're finished up a little bit early. So thanks for joining me today and have a fantastic weekend. Take care.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.